the power. I've got the power in me. I've got the power. I've got the power in me.
Hey everybody, welcome to Protec Live. It is Good Friday and we are here with my good friend Tom Sandry, Director of Training Services for Protec. I'm Matt Medinka, VP of Marketing, your co-host, and we have a special guest today, Mose Ramieh from CBS Field Services. Welcome, Mose. Great to have you.
Happy Friday.
And Mose and I are both on the PowerTest committee for NETA. And so we chat back and forth while we're having some meetings, and we're having a good chat trying to pick locations well, we were coming up with Ron's Ranch, all kinds of stuff like that. So good time. So Mose, I know you're really active with NETA and with PowerTest. I guess first of all, give us a quick overview of CBS Field Services, what you do, and then we're going to jump into a little PowerTest recap and just kind of look at the highlights from that, from your opinion, then jump into maybe some things going on with you guys at CBS.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's so fantastic to be with you guys here live. CBS Field Services, just as a quick background, I mean, I sold a company called Power and Generation Testing with my father to CE Power. And then after some time with them, left and bought a company called PowerTec in Michigan in 2019 with a group of other CBS affiliates. And then from there, we got blended together with Western Electrical Services, which a lot of folks may know from years and years in the NETA organization. And the combination of those organizations got rebranded as CBS Field Services. So anybody that's familiar with PowerTec or Western Electrical Services will now recognize that we are all CBS Field Services. And, it's been a great run. We've got offices all over the United States now, from Detroit to Florida. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, with our most recent office that I'm getting running. Well, I say I'm getting it running. I've got a great team that we're building here, along with the rest of the team, Matt Wallace and Jason Bontrager, and the entire team out on the West Coast with offices in Salt Lake and Phoenix and Portland and Vancouver, Washington, and I'm sure I'm forgetting at least one or two.
So you guys, you have truly national footprint.
Truly working on it. We're certainly not what I would call a large company yet, but we're definitely growing outside of being a regional organization. Definitely stretching our legs and running up some of the growing pains that are all too common and often, like you said, we want to talk a little bit about PowerTest. It's often a topic at PowerTest about the growing pains of every company to recruit, retain, and train manpower. And of course, I use manpower. There's a lot of young women that are joining our industry as well, and excited to see that happening. And I know that one of my affiliates associates, Denise Green, is one of the few women that is a big proponent for getting young women into our industry, because they are rare to by observation. You just don't see very many out there in the field.
Yeah. Well, real quick, if you're a young woman or even a young man who's contemplating a career, like, everybody's scratching the head right now, like college almost doesn't make sense anymore. The cost of going to a 4-year university, you're coming out, $150,000, $200,000 in debt, and a job that pays 40, 45 grand a year. You're making a mortgage payment for a long time on that college degree you may or may not use. As an alternate, I think people are starting to look again at the trades, and you can get your education for relatively inexpensive compared to a 4-year degree, get really practical knowledge really quick, and get in the field, and you can make some serious money if you're out in the field too after you gain some knowledge. So what would you advise a young person looking to get into this arena?
Fantastic question. And I can tell you a story really briefly that when my boys now are 23 and 21, not in the industry, couldn't convince them to come work for their dad. But was at the kitchen counter one day when my youngest was still in high school, and he had one of his high school buddies over, and they were talking about how they were going to go get a job flipping burgers or whatever, and that, they were going to make $12 an hour or whatever it was, and how that was so amazing. And I said, what would be really amazing is if you guys wanted to, you could come work for our company, make, probably $14, $15 an hour, build a career. And that if you really apply yourself, just working in the field, just on the job training, working with somebody in an organization like ours, inside of 5 years, you can be making $80,000 to $100,000 a year and never have to step foot in college. Now, as a quick note, or a note that we can even talk about a little bit, I did have the pleasure of visiting Richmond Community College in North Carolina, and they are one of a handful of 2-year programs that are available that do educate young folks. I shouldn't even say young folks. There was actually some older folks in the program that I got to meet. So they educate people that are interested in this industry in how to do electrical maintenance, electrical testing. Richmond in particular focuses on substation equipment. So they're doing, high voltage circuit breakers, transformers. They definitely have a pretty good relay program for protected relays. And like I say, there's also a program, I believe, in community college in Texas, and another one, I want to say in Long Beach. You think I would know that. And matter of fact, I'm going to make myself go to start making sure I know all of the colleges, because there's actually great young men and women coming out of it. And like I say, I got to visit Richmond for their community fair and talk to dozens of young folks that are looking to start a career here, and they're coming out with more education. So obviously they could start anywhere from 25 to so depending on where they're going and what their education is, $35 an hour. And that's a great, for me, that's a great starting place, and once again, they do get a lot of great experience in those schools. But once again, if somebody just doesn't want to go to college at all, and you just got to show up with the right attitude, the right skills, just to become that right mindset, and then be coachable. And once again, learn it like I did. I like to tell people because I worked for my dad, I worked every night, weekend, awful job, late night, you name it, I was always there. And that's how 25 years later, I'm an overnight success.
It's interesting, talking about the paths of getting into the industry. And it's actually TSTC, Texas State Community College, down here in Texas, that also has an amazing program. But it is kind of interesting. You can either go into one of these community college type programs and come out with a lot of your academic knowledge and head start. I always joke, though, I said learning really begins, though, the day you show up on the job site. You're still pretty much an apprentice at that point, and going to be learning the ropes, putting your community college knowledge, into application. But it's interesting because I've also noticed, and perhaps it was always there. I just over the last year or so just have seen more of this materialize. And again, going back to my days at Shermco, we actively did a lot of recruiting from military. Prime Power, Navy nukes. We would always do a lot of recruiting there. The community colleges, obviously out of Texas, we would lean heavily toward TSTC and so forth. But even there, where though we started to have difficulties in the pipeline, we really started in our workforce development group, really going after more right out of high school. I mean, going to the high school job fairs and so forth, and just bringing them right into day raw. I will say though, that path very attractive to the individual coming in, because imagine you get the ground floor and you don't have college debt at all, as you move up in the ranks. But I will say, in observation and being in the workforce development group at Shermco, it is a huge commitment, not only on the individual coming into that program, but a very huge commitment to the organization in itself, because you have to basically have that framework, have that structure of apprenticeship, mentoring, education, because if they're not getting it from the community college, they've got to get it from you. What are your thoughts, or what have you seen in the industry
Well, and it is fascinating. One of the programs that we've started here, particularly in the Nashville office, because I've got a better finger on the pulse here all the time, is hired a young man that didn't. He had 2 year kind of a, I guess, facilities engineering background. You know, just kind of a broad brush of facility type operations and engineering systems. So nothing specific to our industry, but he had a little bit of education, and we hired him, and we basically said, "Look, young man, we're going to put you on a program that every 90 days, every quarter, we're going to give you a list of things to learn, a list of things that you're going to be able to do and execute at the end of the quarter." And we started off simple, like, can you ductor a circuit breaker? Can you do a contact resistance test on a circuit breaker? Do you know what a contact resistance test is? And that's just one example. And so every quarter he's got tasks that he's expected to learn. And at the end of the year, we're going to take you from $25 an hour to $30 an hour. But we're not going to wait until the end. Every quarter, if you are able to execute the tasks, pass the tests, you're going to get $1.25 raise. So all of a sudden, you're not having to wait an entire year to see that raise. We're telling this individual and anybody else that we bring in after him that, hey, here's what you got to learn. And if you do it, every 90 days, you're going to get $1.25 raise for his particular case.
Very nice.
That's really, really beneficial to all of us, beneficial to us, beneficial to him. Because if we get to a point at the 90 days where we're like, man, you're not worth that $1.25 raise, then you're kind of you're not pulling your weight. You're not doing what we've asked you to do. And it's a lot easier to have that, maybe this isn't the right place for you discussion. And once again, but the idea is that we do get that growth. And of course, the learning experience that I've had through this process early on is, well, a lot of the learning that we do, as I mentioned, is on the job. I think it's the best place to learn. Like you mentioned, you can take that college education that you got, and then you get to the field, and that's when you really start learning, because that's where the real world is. That's how all the issues and challenges that we run up against when we go to the field that you never expect to have come up. So we've learned, and we've begun to learn that, well, gosh, if we're doing a lot of medium voltage cable testing and not a lot of high voltage breaker, a lot of high voltage breaker testing, then we got to adjust our list of things and tasks for that particular quarter, right? We got to learn how to be fluid and flexible, at least in the program that we've developed, where it's basically, once again, focused on what are we doing today? What is it that we're doing on the job? And I think that's super important. And I hope that more companies, I hope a lot of companies are already doing that, taking advantage of those training opportunities in the field, because we all know, and if you don't, I mean, you can say you like to do training and everything, but training doesn't pay the bills, except for you guys, maybe. I get out in the field, get work done, and get billable hours.
I think that's a brilliant approach, and I actually have started to see a lot of migration in that direction, because I think a lot of our paradigms of the past was, we go to a training institute, we sit 40% of the time, taking in, lecture, and then maybe we go into a controlled environment lab, and we get to tinker and play a little bit in that controlled environment. And I'm not trying to knock that. I mean, that's good, solid. It gives some level of exposure to hook up equipment, take measurements, and so forth. Friendly environment to go ahead and do so on. But if you really want to show proficiency, if you really want to demonstrate, your ability of comprehension and able to implement, on the job is where it's at. Because as you know, in our craft, today we're working on 1952, grade switchgear. Next week, we're out there, on the latest and greatest, modern launches into the industry and all points in between. So to really show proficiency in the subject matter, on the job is your lab. I think the academics need to be set up to give you the information you need, and we can test your ability to intake that information, everything through the testing functions, everything. But then the frontline leaders, the supervisors on the job site, if I'm understanding your approach, they'll have a task list. So, hey, on this job, Mose is going to now implement or demonstrate his ability here, 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 and here, and then we get sign off, And what's nice about that is it's not on a sampling of one that you walked in that lab on that afternoon, but maybe the sign off process is demonstrated over 3 different jobs at 3 different locations, 3 different scenarios. I love that approach that you're using with the, on the job.
Yeah. The other thing that just came to mind is once again, learning in the lab or learning in a classroom environment is fantastic. Obviously, you can consume a lot of information. You can go over a lot of data and diagrams and things like that. And once again, that's pretty easy to apply when you get to the field, except instead of that breaker being on the floor, maybe it's up in a bolted in enclosure, and you got stuff that's in the way, and your test set can't roll right up in front of it, and your cables aren't the perfect length, and you got to sometimes be creative. And once again, I did a job, this is years ago, where I was helping some young men that kind of knew how to do some breaker testing. And we got done with one switchboard, and I said, "Great, guys, let's get our stuff. Let's move down to the other switchboard." I come back after, because I'm like, "You guys handle that. I'll go do something else for an hour." I come back an hour later, they're still standing there with the test equipment. I'm like, "What are you guys doing?" He's like, "Well, Joe said that he couldn't do this with the elevator until then." And I said, "No. We got to make sure that we're staying on point and we're effectively communicating with people that are, the importance of what we got to get done." So it's also the interpersonal piece that that you can learn in the field as well, because that's always changing. I worked with an engineer down at Mercedes-Benz, and he came from Kentucky Utilities, and he was telling me that a relay is a relay. It'll always do the same thing by and large, but people at every one of these substations, every one of these little industries that we work in are all different. So it's not only the equipment, but it's learning how to work with people and to communicate effectively with them.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and that's actually something that I'd like to see, more in the trainings and everything. And part of the on the jobs is learning interpersonal skills. Because I know, as a crew lead and stuff like that, there were certain individuals that, during the outage, if the client were to come up to them, no harm, no foul. I wasn't worried about them opening their mouth and, giving commentary on what they were doing. There were others that, I was just, the hair on the back of my neck would stand on end if I seen the client get anywhere near them, because it's like, oh, dear God, please don't let him open his mouth. Please don't let him open his mouth.
That is actually the ultimate test. It's always been hard for me to kind of like, hey, here's like level 1 experience, level 2 experience. How do you gauge where somebody is, right? And I always say, like, the highest level of I'm drawing a blank on the word I'm looking for. The highest level of accomplishment really is, can you communicate accurately and effectively with the client and build confidence in them about yourself, right? And if you can build confidence with the client, that's like the highest level of really that you need to obtain as far as our industry goes. I mean, yeah, you can get into highfalutin engineering speak, and if you're talking to engineers, you might have to go there.
Right.
But in 9 cases out of 10 in the industry of acceptance and maintenance testing, can you effectively communicate what you're doing? What if you're doing a DLRO or a power factor test or a VLF with 10 delta, can you effectively communicate that to somebody else, in particular your client, and build confidence? And that's a high level to obtain for a lot of folks.
It truly is. And it does, there's other factors. I mean, I started to put together some training programs for soft skill development and so forth, and was definitely able to help some individuals enhance their ability. They were able to get better at it. But with others, it's also just, you almost have to have it in your personality, in your DNA, because, an extrovert, somebody who is, is comfortable in talking in, group situations and stuff like that. There are just some that just, you polish them and they just really, really shine. There's others that, we got actually quite good. I think they met that level of accomplishment, but, like the one gentleman, he always would joke at me. He goes, every time I have to interface with the client, he goes, I'm getting more and more comfortable with it. I think my skills are getting better, but he goes, that's outside my comfort zone. There's a reason why I'm a field tech. I like to be in the corner all by myself and just, doing my thing. But he goes, look, I understand the reason why, we do have to interface with the client, that, that's where our paychecks come from. But he said, thank you for the help and training. But he goes, just to let you know, every time I do it, I'm outside my comfort zone. That to me, that's work.
Hey,
It is. Go ahead, Matt.
I was gonna say let's shift gears into PowerTest. 4 weeks ago, we were down in Orlando, and let's see if we can even remember it now.
That's all a blur.
But just wanted to get kind of just get your high level just thoughts and overviews of what you saw, what you heard, anything you want to repeat you thought was cool, any in the trade show area, any new products you saw that were pretty cool.
Well, I tell you, I definitely want to circle back to the trade show floor, because I thought it was incredible this year. I think one of the best displays ever in any of the power tests I've been to, and maybe that's everybody just really getting back in the swing of things coming out of 2020 and 2021. But one of the things that the paper that I found most interesting, I actually think it won one of the best paper presented awards for PowerTest this year, was, and I apologize, and I don't have his name written down, but it was a paper on cable testing, medium voltage cable testing, and talked extensively. And he had tons of data. I mean, just hundreds and thousands of cable tests to sample from. And for our listeners and our viewers, the quick takeaway for me was, when I first started in the industry, we were doing DC high pot testing of new cable, in service cable, didn't matter. We were doing DC high pot, either maintenance testing or acceptance testing, following the IEEE standard. And then from there we started doing, okay, we're only going to do VLF VLF with 10 delta for in-service cable, and it was sort of like you can use DC high pot or VLF for acceptance testing. And now pretty much all the testing we do is VLF with 10 delta, new cable, in-service cable. It doesn't much matter to us anymore. And what the paper pointed out with all the data is that none of these tests, not the DC high pot, except if you go way back to, I think it was the lead paper cable. That's where DC high potting is actually of some value. But if it's EPR or XLPE cable, DC high pot, VLF with 10 delta, they do not. I shouldn't say what they won't find. They only find in new. If I remember from the presentation, they only find about 1% of defects in new cable installations. And anecdotally, I think it's true, because I've been testing cable for 25 years, and barring some just horrendous, awful installations, I really haven't failed that many cables. And I don't know if that speaks to the quality of the workmanship of the folks that have done the terminations on the cables I've tested, but I don't think we're that good, right? I mean, we're good, but we probably wouldn't pass 99% of the cables, if we were doing other tests. And I don't know if I should take a pause here, but I mean, the other tests and obviously there's also a cost, incrementing
right.
situation that goes up here. But the offline 60 hertz partial discharge was the winner on finding installation defects on terminations. And so everything that I've thought about cable testing was put to the test, put to a challenge that day in that 45-minute paper, because I always considered, hey, I'm doing VLF with 10 delta, or I'm doing DC high pot. I have confidence that cable is going to be good for basically for forever, or 20 years, or whatever it's supposed to last. And now, according to that paper, maybe not so true.
Yeah, the speaker was Ben Lance,
Yes.
and he was from Umcorp. Fantastic individual. Longtime member of the Insulated Conductor Committee and the IEEE Power Engineering Society and everything. And yes, that, I thought the paper was fantastic. And a lot of the areas that, when we go into testing, I know just I've been involved in now medium and high voltage electrical power cables for probably going closer to 30 odd years, and going through that whole history of from DC to the current VLF methods, tan delta, and so forth. One of the biggest issues that I see in the cable testing and diagnostics arena is a lot of times just working with my clients. They are doing testing because they feel they have to, whether it's to appease an insurance company or whatever, but they don't know why they're testing.
Mhm.
To make it worse, they don't know why they're testing or what they're even looking for. And I think that also leads into some inefficiency sometimes of, what types of tests you really want to be going after. If we go back to like the IEEE, for installation and acceptance testing, we'll see a lot of verbiage and everything in there about what they call type 1 tests, which basically is a high pot test, progressively increasing voltage. Reason why we're doing it is to intentionally grow a defect under a controlled condition, fault it so we can find it, repair it, and restore in better condition. Now, it's interesting, 60 hertz is always going to win. As far as the ability to accelerate and grow a defect, 60 hertz is definitely going to win in almost every situation. The only limitation that you have to the 60 hertz sometimes is the overall size of your power supply that's going to be required to energize your load, which is why the VLF, or very low frequency, came into. But VLF is probably the second most efficient in growing a defect. But it's crazy when you read the IEEE 400. What do they say about how long should you run the test? They don't give you a straight answer. It's like, oh, if you want to find 99% of 1 hour is what we found is the best time. If you want to find 80%, 30 minutes is a good time.
Well, that's actually been a point of contention and quite and some frustration with our clients, right? And with my technicians, because if you read the IEEE, and please, hopefully nobody's going to come back and quote me on this, but there is a line in there that yes, 60 minutes for acceptance testing, or you can terminate the test at 35 minutes if the leakage value hasn't changed in the last 30 samples or something like that.
Right.
And I'm like, well, do I want, and this is where, once again, I think good standard processes and practices come into play, is I don't want any technician arbitrarily to say, you know what, I got a thing, this cable's good because that value hasn't changed for the last 40 or whatever the requirement is, and therefore I'm going to terminate this test at 35 minutes instead of waiting for the whole hour. Right. Mm-hmm. So once again, and that's where we've taken the IEEE and taken it to the extent that barring a customer saying, I got to have it on faster, you got to finish faster, we always hold that for the 60 minutes. Because to your point, the IEEE is not entirely clear other than to say you want to catch most of them, go an hour.
Right. And a lot of that the whole time period and everything really came from supporting members of the IEEE turning in their data and so forth. So, I mean, really, to properly phrase it would be, in our experience of the data samples that we were subjected to, we feel that 1 hour should, find X amount percentage of the, but like anything in our, it's based on our sampling size and everything that we're drawing these, conclusions and everything. Now, the one thing that I talk about in all my training classes is from day one, I was never a big fan of the time-based test, because in the labs, I did enough time as a lab rat, getting coffee for very smart people. Not that I was one of the smart people. I just brought them coffees and, watched what they were doing. But, watching accelerated growths and everything of how electrical tree forms and so forth, it takes time to grow a defect. And the frustration I always had with, high pot testing in general and everything being time-based was, all right, let's say arbitrarily, I ran a 45-minute test. Okay. I always would ask the question, what would happen if I ran for 46 minutes?
Who knows?
Nobody. Yeah. So, I mean, over that 45 minutes, maybe I was growing a channel, but the timer went off. I turned it off. The cable survived. I am now putting that cable into service in a significantly weaker state than if I would have just left it alone.
Mhm.
And that was my big issue always with the HiPod test was, you're subject to a timer, but you don't know what's actually happening in there. The greatest thing I think, came about in the 2013 release of the IEEE 400, where they started to introduce us to this thing called monitored withstand, where during that 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, whatever it is, be either capturing tan delta data or be capturing partial discharge data. So if all of a sudden, 18 minutes into the test, we start to see partial discharge materializing, hey, we know we triggered something. We initiated something, now no longer subject to that timer. Or if 25, 30 minutes into the test, the tan delta number starts to become unstable and over the next minute starts to linearly increase, I know I've invoked something. I've created something in there. Now, the 60 hertz versus the VLF, in the perfect world, we'd always be running at 60 hertz because that's what our circuits run off of. But you brought up the one point about you always have to also consider the cost factor. The cost of bringing in a 60 hertz supply capable of energizing a half a mile of 35 kV collector feeder cable or whatever. So there are some compromises.
It's very expensive, right? I mean, it's be very expensive.
Oh yeah, and even in I've been in enough like industrial plants and everything where just the practicality of the physical room of getting a test set of that nature to the circuit is just very prohibitive. So the alternatives to 60 hertz, I think we can all agree in the perfect world, 60 is the way to go. That's where our systems work. But it's just not a one size fit all, unfortunately, on the application side, sometime of where we're doing the tests.
No, and once again, and I know that, for example, online partial discharge testing, once again, it has its limitations as well, because to your point, it's still time based, as in I'm going to put my monitoring system on here for 30 seconds and go, yep, there's my PD reading, and I'm off to the next point that I'm
right.
Example. But I am a big proponent, especially if a client has, and I've yet to meet the person that has a critical enough system, a critical enough cable system where they're willing to spend the money to install the continuous online PD monitoring, right? Those systems, I think, have a lot of value. Now, you don't get, as I've been told, I've not seen this in practice yet, but once again, you can monitor your system PD. Once PD starts on a circuit or in a section of bus, the time between you detecting enough PD that's out of the normal range to failure is really not known. But you do know that you have a problem that you can then step in and be proactive about turning it off, isolating it, and possibly repairing it before it becomes a catastrophic failure or shuts down your process. But once again, I've, as much as I've promoted that over the years, I've yet to find somebody that wants to invest the resources to install it.
The closest I think I've come to that was one facility. God, I'm so tempted to give the name, but without asking them permission first, I'm going to just say a company out there who is a rather known paper supply company, paper pulp company. I'll just leave it at that. They invested in the online system, but the system that they invested in, all the sensors attached to the external of the gear. So you didn't have to outage, you didn't have to install it inside the gear. The reason why they went that path was they're almost using it not 100% full time. They're almost using it like a power quality analyzer. They'll hook it up to a switchgear lineup, and they'll leave it there for maybe 3 months and record data. Then they'll tear it down, move it to another location, hook it up, leave it for 3 months. But that's the closest I've seen to somebody who is really practically taking a full-time monitoring approach to the problem. Other clients, I remember, they would call us in once a quarter, and we would come there with basically all the handheld probes, and we would do a survey once a year, twice a year, type of thing. But as you pointed out, the online, there are some good definite benefits. You're not ruling it out as something you don't want to do. It does have promise. It does have some good benefits because it's looking at real world operating conditions. But as you mentioned, there's so many different trigger factors that it's a snapshot in the moment of time. The day that I was there, it was dry, cool air, and you were at medium load. Now, had I come back the next day when the humidity was up around 95%, and you were running at top load, yeah, maybe I would have found something then. The conditions of the day that I was there, I didn't find it.
Right.
So you've got to. I remember again clients that would come to me, asking about the online. One of the first statements I would always make them say, "What's your level of commitment to it? If this is something you would like me to just come out one afternoon, do it once and done, and you don't really anticipate or want to do a follow-up." I said, in all honesty, save your dollars. There's other services we can offer you where you'll get a better return. But if this is something you want to commit to, is maybe as a minimum, sign up for 4 surveys over the course of the year. So again, we can take multiple snapshots and see what we're dealing with. But if it's a once and done, I personally don't have a lot of value in it, because.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you, and part of what we were just talking about, humidity playing a role or other conditions playing a role, was another point in the paper on the PD and was over voltage protection of the cable, and making sure that you have proper arresters and other over voltage protection installed on the system, so that the cable would never be exposed to a voltage level, a voltage spike that would, and I think it was 4 times the cable rating or something like that. If you can keep it below that, the even poorly constructed cable would not get to a point where PD would start and then not extinguish when it comes back to normal level. So, it was very interesting. And that was another interesting thing that I never really considered a lot is, what is the importance of the lightning protection that we put on our systems, and
right.
Never hit me that it was also there to protect that cable from going and beginning PD.
Yeah, I think that paper from Ben was definitely one of the most talked about during between the sessions and so forth. Even in the cable panel, I think it was referenced a couple times during those sessions as well. So yeah, I think he gets the kudo points for one of the more memorable papers that was presented at the conference.
He definitely got a conversation started with me, and definitely has me looking at cable testing in a brand new light. But speaking of the cable panel, we also had that opportunity where I got to share a picture of a cable that looked like it had stalactites growing out of it. And I think you've got one too.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Yeah, Matt, cue that up.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, this was similar to the picture that I had an opportunity to share as a question on that panel discussion. And once again, I think, and Tom, you could correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there were probably 2 or 3 other people in the whole place. We had 100 people in the room. I don't think there were probably 2 or 3 that had seen this happen before.
Yeah, it's a very rare. And it was kind of funny when you brought that picture because, we didn't have it on projector. You had it on your laptop computer. And, as soon as I saw it, I think I shouted out, "Oh, that's polymeric plasterization." Everybody's like, "What? What is that?"
Of course, Tom would know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's just opportunities, being at the right place at the right time. It just so happened I was doing a lot of work down, with petrochemical plants and so forth down in the Gulf area. And I remember the first time coming across this. Now, you said stalactites or whatever. I use a little bit, less nice. I just said, looks like the cable got sick and threw up. Was, kind of my thing. But I remember the first time looking at it, I was afraid to touch it, didn't know what to do with it. Because, what is that? Never seen it before. And, well, I actually obtained a letter from one of the support engineers at one of the cable manufacturers who was able to explain what this was. And I'll hit a couple of the highlights on that. Basically, the engineer was saying that this condition has been observed in rare incidents in medium voltage, oil-resistant, PVC jacketed, and older cable types where there is flooded duct in combination with heavily loaded circuits. Basically, the recipe for making this happen is you need a hot, moist environment with almost an unlimited water supply. Gee, I wonder why we found that down in the Houston in the Gulf area. Was the first place I came across it. But going on in the letter, he says, the mechanism for formation of the white extruded involves the migration of moisture into the PVC, which hydrolyzes some of the plasticizer's ester groups to carbolic acid. He's getting way too chemically here for me, but the acid then reacts with the calcium carbonate filler, forming a calcium salt of ester. This product then migrates down the jacket insulation interface to the terminations and appears as the white soapy substance that we see in these photographs. So any of you chemical majors out there that understood those words I struggled on pronouncing, you've got some of the chemistry of what's going on here. The most important part I got out of the letter was that the polymeric pasteurization and the hydrolysis products are not absorbed by the insulation. Therefore, they remain at the interface, and that they provide no ill effects to the deterioration of the insulation or to the jacket. So other than looking ugly, it's not, compromising the performance of the insulation or to the jacket, according to this engineer's letter. The recommendation is basically to clean and re-terminate. Ideally, if you can remove the moisture and or drop load so it's not running as hot, it would prevent the situation from occurring again. Because again, moisture and high circuit load seem to be the causes of it. Well, that's a little bit harder to control in the real world. But at least the knowledge that if you, any of you watching, if you do run across this, it's not interfering with the performance. It's not like you're about to go ahead and have an outage and things are going to short out. According to what I'm reading in this gentleman's reply letter, the insulation is fine. It's not getting absorbed into that. The jacket is fine, but this is a byproduct that's being produced through the chemical reactions that I mentioned. By cleaning it up and re-terminating, well, at least get rid of the unsightliness. But to prevent it, we need to either remove the heat or the moisture.
Yeah. So it somewhat implies, though, because like I say, both of our pictures are very similar, that the material is coming out essentially at the interface of the termination and the cable jacket, right? It's bleeding through from the. So to me, it almost implies that the jacket is or has become damaged because the moisture, this process is coming, up through the jacket material or up inside the jacket and outside at the termination point. So in theory, it somewhat to me implies that the jacket itself is probably damaged in the conduit, and then this chemical process that the cable is undergoing, as described in your letter, is also in theory causing pressure to push that material out. Right. I've seen, and I'm not seeing this, but I have seen problems with cable where one end is at a higher location than the termination end, and you can get some hydrostatic pressure right? I actually had a cable push load break elbows off of a transformer one time because the one end was on a pole that was not properly terminated, and water over years of rain and whatnot had gotten in there, and the hydrostatic pressure ended up pushing the load break elbows off the transformer, creating a fault. And so unless the moisture or unless the water at one end is higher, this chemical process that is happening, it must be creating some kind of pressure, and or it's a hydrostatic type thing. Because I'd be curious if it only shows up at one end, or do you? Because that's a question I didn't ask when I got my item, was whether this was occurring at both ends or only one.
You know what? Interesting. The photograph that you're seeing there, we only saw it at the single end. Now, you know what? I didn't even give that much thought on that particular, because it was such a new experience and everything. And I was just proud of myself that I was actually able to find somebody who can speak elegantly and give me some rationale of what's going on. But in the 3 or 4 times since then that I recall seeing this on job sites, now that you mention it, I only saw it on one end, not repeated on both ends. So I think you're right. I think it might have something to do with pitch of the cable and, pushing it out,
Yeah. Definitely an odd situation, not something we run across every day. And it was great to get some conversation around that and share that, so that, if somebody else opens up a panel someday and they see that growth coming out of the cable, that they're not completely freaked out. Although I'm still a little bit skeptical about the cables just fine.
That was kind of, honestly, that was my first initial reaction, since the letter came from a cable manufacturer. Not trying to say anything there, but I again, I'm kind of like, I'm physically seeing this stuff oozing out. Now, are you telling me that is not in any way changing the characteristics of the jacket or compromising the jacket? Stuff is actually coming out. I mean,
right.
I know just in my human body, if I see stuff coming out of me, it normally has an impact.
Exactly. So true. So true.
So we talked about the trade show floor a little bit. Give us your impressions this year. I think this year over last year, obviously, more people definitely in attendance this year overall. I think there was almost 1,000 people with vendors. Yep. We had probably, 25, 30% larger show floor. I felt. I personally didn't get a chance to walk around. Tom and I were broadcasting, and we were pretty busy for the 5.5 hours, so we didn't get a chance to walk around. But what did you see?
Well, and I did have a chance to sit down with Tom for a little bit while y'all were broadcasting. That was fun. Thank you for letting me join you for a little bit. But I think one, it was a much bigger experience, like I guess mentioned. It looks like the exhibitors were interested in spending more money, because there were some pretty large booths, and like our company, our sister company, Circuit Breaker Sales, had quite a large booth. Obviously wanting to show off some of the products that they're developing. Not only the MAC testing for like vacuum bottles, but our organization is now, I say our organization, CB Circuit Breaker Sales, is producing a line of 15 kV, air or metal enclosed air switches, because of the supply chain issues that other manufacturers are experiencing. And then, once again, just some of the, the technology that continues to evolve. I can't wait to get, not that I would use it every day, so let's keep it in the hands of the guys that need it the most. But, the arc flash suits, gone are the days of the really heavy, bulky 40 cal suits that I wear. Matter of fact, that's what I have in my truck right now, is the one that feels like it's this thick,
The quilted.
And now you've got and I forget the name of the fabric manufacturer. Tom's probably got it at his fingertips, but they're making the 40 cal suit that feels like nothing much more than a windbreaker. It's really lightweight. Love that product, and it was good to see that, along with the flip front face masks or face shields.
Those were awesome. I really like those.
Talk about a game changer. Talk about something I wish I had when I was wearing the stuff in the field every every day, basically, when I was working in the field every day.
Mhm.
Now I get to wear it infrequently, and I get reminded because the guys all have the flip front. I got their hand-me-downs, and so yeah, those are miraculous. And then like I say, there's so much new. I don't know that the technology is so much new, but just the sophistication of the ability to once again interact your interface, user interface with equipment these days,
Yeah.
whether it be a computer screen. Manufacturers now have where you can Bluetooth with your phone to get and change settings on trip units, on relays. Just so much going on in that world. And then I think another thing is just like arc flash technology, arc flash reduction technology that we're seeing, and use of
Mhm.
fiber loops and point sensors to once again try and clear systems faster so that we can have a safer system. And then like I say remote racking, several choices out there, and
Yes.
they were what, at least three different manufacturers remote racking, I think, at the show. And once again,
Definitely
that is
three.
becoming
Yeah.
a bigger and bigger deal in the industry to use remote racking, remote switching, because that is a definite game changer. And of course, ArcSafe is a provider of those sorts of things as well. And let's see what else. I was able to stay away from the beers, and partly because I had the pleasure of doing an interview. Nita signed me up to do an interview as part of a promotional material or promotional thing that they wanted to put together to talk about Nita and talk about the industry, somewhat not unlike what we're talking about here. So
Mhm.
Yeah, that I did before the show started. I walked around briefly, and we did go over to Circuit Breaker Sales' booth, and that breaker sitting there that we were opening and closing. Don't know if we're supposed to be doing that, but it was still fun to do it. I just like, just like the kid with the Hot Wheels car, you got to open the door and shut
yeah,
the door. No,
That's
that was
right.
fun. I think you're right. There was a lot of software really getting like throwing darts, really like getting into some really specific stuff in our industry that I think is some good evolution in the software side. And talking about the manufacturers, like I think, I'll call out Megger in particular. They're coming out with a lot of new equipment, and you got equipment that's half the size that does 3 things, 4 things versus, carrying 4 big boxes with you now. So I think there's definitely an evolution with that, with the Bluetooth, just the ability for ease of reporting, versus having to put it on a memory stick and it's getting a lot better, a lot more streamlined. I think, AEMC had their new PowerPad 4. We actually had that in our booth. So I think there's definitely a bit of an arms race going on with equipment right now with the manufacturers.
yeah,
So
we want it lighter and cheaper.
yeah, and it's getting there. I mean, cheap is relative, right? Like, we're
Right.
now instead of 100 grand, it's 80 grand. Yeah.
Well,
And that's where we come in. That's why we rent it, right? So you don't have to buy it. But
and
yeah,
I tell you what, it seems to be there were a lot of rental companies there too. So I think that speaks to the fact that our industry is really, the test companies are not necessarily willing to invest in the equipment. They would rather rent it, except for obviously the tried the day in day out staplers of the industry like DLROs and installation resistance test sets. But when we get into things like SFRA, some of the larger cable testing equipment, I mean, how many HVA 60s can you have, right? I assume isn't that a model number, HVA 60?
That is a model number.
yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that's not something that in our industry, not or in our markets, not something we run into where we need that large test set very often. So when we do, we don't need to buy it. We just rent it from guys like yourselves. And once again, the fact that there were a lot of people there tells me that the rental industry is making the money.
It's it's a very niche industry for sure.
Oh, for sure.
It's capital intensive. I mean, just, like your company's capital intensive as well. So, we're all kind of pieces in the ecosphere of what's going on. So speaking of which, let's kind of get into some industry chat, I guess, with the time we have left. what's CBS Field Services doing in 2023? Where do you see the industry heading? What are our big challenges for 2023?
Well, and I think we've already hit on one of the big challenges at the beginning, and that is finding and recruiting, training, and keeping great talent, right? I mean, because you talk about intensive. I mean, yeah, test equipment's a big deal. Trucks are expensive, but it's the individuals that actually generate the revenue, right? And by and large, I think the industry standard is you can get between $250,000 and $300,000 in revenue per technician. So if you want to double the size of your business and you're a $3 million company, that's 10 technicians. You got to go to 20 technicians and all the things that go along with that. Not the least of which, of course, is communication, payroll, and just trying to keep them all happy. Because that's one of the hardest things to do sometimes with a technician is keep them happy. And of course, happiness for technicians looks like part challenge, part being home enough that their wife still recognizes them, right? Their dog doesn't growl at them, which is hard to do for a lot of companies. But I think that's one area where, if we want to talk about CBS Field Services, our technicians are probably, on the road about 25% of the time. So, about a week a month, they can expect to be outside of their hometown, out of their bedroom. But we tend to, once again, want to build market share in the areas where we have offices. And as other markets begin to pester us more, like I'm getting a lot of requests for in the Carolinas these days, we start looking at, what could we do to, recruit a technician that could start an office there, or, do acquisitions. Now, once again, the rate of acquisition, I think, in our industry is another thing we could chat about. I'm certainly not an expert on that, but I've been around long enough to know, and I know Tom and Matt, you guys both have. You've seen company after company get absorbed by, Shermco, EPS. Once again, our company's done a little bit of it and would like to do more, but even that is becoming more and more difficult. But once again, there are a lot of aging owners. Unfortunately, we lost, for example, Al Peterson. We lost him last year. And once again, his business was one that he was still, basically the owner of it up until the day he passed away. And, I guess if there's some owners out there that are wondering, hey, what should I do with my business? Do something before you have to, right? Make some decisions about how you want to either transfer your company or how you may want to look out for somebody that might be wanting to acquire a business that you have, because you have something of value. And so to just not take advantage of that opportunity and properly transition it, I think is a concern. Once again, I don't have a list of the top 20 businesses that have, once I'm using the term aging owners, guys that are in their 70s, and like I said, I know, like my father, he got out, he was 70-ish when we sold the business. So once again, it was time, and now he's off enjoying his retirement, and I'm still out here turning wrenches most days. But no, so let's see what else is on with CBS Field Services. We're doing a good bit with automotive. I want to talk. Maybe we should talk just a second about automotive. We're seeing a huge, in particular in the market that I'm most familiar with, the southeast here, a huge boom. It's like the California gold rush for building new automotive plants, particularly for EVs. We have no less than easily a half dozen projects. Unfortunately, not involved with all of them, but familiar with them. Know that they're going on, and we're talking about millions of square feet under roof. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in electrical apparatus that's having to be manufactured and delivered, and all the supply chain issues. I mean, people and obviously, to your point, Tom, I can't share all the names on this, but I'm familiar with some folks that have lost their jobs over not being able to meet the requirements of some of these sites. And, and I don't know why they lost their job. I mean, I don't know if they overpromised and woefully underdelivered, or if they straight up lied. I mean, I don't know. I just know that there was been at least a couple of firings and, those resignations where, well, I wonder why he resigned.
Yeah.
So that is, I think that those those plants are creating a number of stresses, like I say, on the supply chain, on companies like ours. I mean, even the largest companies in our organization in the NETA world are being stretched to maintain the acceptance testing that these plants are looking to have done on their power systems to ensure that they're safe and reliable. And as I always like to say, you know, the energization date is here, and the day you're supposed to start testing is here until there's a delay here, and then this doesn't get delivered, and then it didn't get installed, and then they had to move it, and the engineer had to change it, and all of a sudden your testing time frame went from 2 months to 2 weeks, and the whole time you've been sitting there like, well, what am I supposed to do? And you wind up getting squeezed, and that's where, once again, you know, we're always looking for partner opportunities, because sometimes, you know, it's and I'm sure not the only one that's ever said this. Hopefully it's kind of a feast or famine, right? Sometimes you're feasting and you got more than you can handle, and sometimes you guys are a little slow. And I've always wondered, and I'm sure of this, that some companies, we're not all on the same cycle, right? So if we could find ways to partner and share and collaborate, I think that's a winning strategy for all the electrical testing companies, especially those in that kind of medium size range like we are. You know, we're 55 technicians or something about like that. And, you know, those companies out there that have 6 or 7, you know, that's a pretty average. I think that's probably pretty average office across the NETA companies is probably somewhere around 8 to 10 guys. If I had to
around there. Yeah.
Guess. And when I say some are really large, 400 plus, and then some of us are medium size. So, you know, I think that the strategies that we can find where smaller NETA companies, even if you don't want to be acquired, can come together and share resources and help each other out in a collaborative manner. And I don't think that's a stretch. We're seeing, I'm seeing large engineering firms, large electrical firms coming together and collaborating on projects all the time. I mean, no one electrical company, electrical contractor can build some of these plants. So they're bringing in multiple contractors and also partnering them up on occasion to make sure that the work gets done. And there's, you know, that team effort and good communication that are necessary.
That's definitely something Tom and I have been trying to work on, I think, with, you know, because we're kind of Switzerland in the big scheme of things, being neutral, is just trying to help in the collaboration side of things, because I think traditionally, you know, you're in a competitive industry, but we're trying to knock some of those brand walls down with our training and just say, hey, look, from an industry perspective, you got a lot of intrinsic knowledge leaving as people retire, and you got a replacement issue with people coming in, but you got an even bigger issue with having experienced technicians, those NETA level 3s and level 4s that everybody's just constantly trying to find. So the market is just, you know, when somebody gets picked from one company, now you've left a hole in another company. And how do you feel that? We got to train them up, right? That's the only way to do it. So, you know, that's why you notice we're wearing our inner circle hats here today. And that's really what inner circle is all about, is it's like, we're an inner circle of individuals who are interested in the industry and interested in learning and trying to fill those gaps, not worrying about what brand we're particularly representing.
Yeah.
See, we're gray and we're neutral. You know, we don't care about the you know.
Well, as I say, I think we're going to have to see more of that, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing to help, you know, to help facilitate that. I think it's important.
Yep. Okay, I think our time is up today. Mose, we really enjoyed having you. We'd love to have you back sometime. We got plenty of stuff to talk about, and we'd love to have you back and later in the year and check in with you, see how you're doing, and see what's going on, especially in the automotive side of things.
I tell you what, I'd love to come back. Plenty more. I say there's always more to share, and I just finished up my latest in the field article for NETA World. So if you guys haven't checked out the NETA World articles from the In the Field team, I'm one of a couple of contributors. They're really great articles. And like I say, this industry can be very complicated, but 80% of the problems that you're going to run into are pretty straightforward, and somebody's seen it before.
Great. Okay. Check out the latest issue of NETA World. Is that in the magazine or online?
Both. They have the NETA World online, so the magazine online, as well as the print copy. So
great. Okay, so we'll look for that as well, and we will see you soon. And appreciate your time. And thank you, Mose from CBS Field Services, for joining us today. Tom, any closing remarks?
No, just want to again, today is Good Friday, if I'm not mistaken. So to all of those that have been online and everything with us, great holiday weekend. Hope you all get some rest and relaxation.
Great. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you till our next broadcast. Bye.